choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something.
Small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I wanted to give you everything, but I still stand in awe of superficial things.
Sputnik project dates back to 17th of December 1954, when Sergei Korolev asked Permitor de Antonov if he could build an artificial satellite that would orbit the Earth. On January 1956, approved by the Council of Ministers, work began on the first satellite named Object D. It was scheduled to be complete in 1957 or 1958. Thanks to Dmitry Siegevich, the main engineer, by July 1956, the draft was complete. With many engine problems, it wasn't able to launch till 1957. Fearing the US would launch one before the USSR, they needed to launch in April or May of 1957. The first test of the R-7 rocket was May 10, 1954. This would be the rocket that Sputnik would travel on. On the 22nd of September, Sputnik got its name while being attached and modified with the R-7 rocket. Sputnik was finally launched at 19:28:34 on the 4th of October 1957. The Russian scientists waited until it made a full orbit before they called the Soviet Nikita Khrushchev. The success rocked the world along with the US. The Soviet victory sent the US in dead last for the space race. Little did the Soviets know we would come back with a boom. The Mariner 2 wasn't the first space success for the US, but was an important one. The Mariner 2 was sent to Venus to solar orbit it. It was the first robotic space probe to conduct a successful planetary encounter. The probe was built and designed by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The power system of the probe was like no other in that time. It consisted of 2 solar cell wings. What was important of the success of the Mariner 2 was that these wings stayed balanced. Much of the technology used on Mariner 2 was revolutionary. We gained the common household microwave from it. Timing was crucial for the launch of Mariner 2. The Mariner 2 was scheduled to launch in either July or August. As much as our government tried speeding up the process to beat the Russians, the Mariner 2 didn't launch until August 27, 1962. The mission was a success, but still wasn't done as easily as expected. Many times during the mid-course of the flight, maneuvers were needed. On September 8th, the probe experienced a problem with its altitude control. It soon fixed itself hours later. The U.S. success would lead us to greater victories in the space race.
Destruct command. Repeat, destruct command.
Missile apparently blew up.
Vostok 1 was a Soviet mission that sent Yuri Gagarin into Earth's orbit. Yuri was the first man ever in space. The flight was in orbit of the Earth. With the success of Sputnik 1, the Soviets wanted to take it a step further and orbit a man around the Earth. This would set them even further ahead of the Americans in the space race. The rocket that launched Yuri into orbit was called the Vostoklis, gaining the mission's name Vostok 1. The 27-year-old Yuri Gagarin was the only member aboard Vostok 1. Yuri had to pass several medical and fitness exams to be able to survive in orbit. Vostok 1 launched April 12, 1961. Gagarin came back into orbit not soon after the launch. He was the first man in space. He had proved to everyone in the world that man could survive in space, thus pushing space exploration to a new height that the U.S. would meet in the years to come. Apollo 11 was the first space flight that landed on the moon. Americans Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were the first on the moon in July 1969. Apollo was launched by a Saturn V rocket from the Kennedy Space Center. Its launch and landing were recorded and broadcasted on live television. Before launch, land, and return, the astronauts spent several hours preparing. The hardest part they faced was landing the lander on the moon. Next, they had to deal with the G-force they would experience along with many other things. On July 16, 1969, Apollo launched into orbit. On July 19th, it launched its propulsion engines into the lunar orbit. July 20th, 1969, the lunar module separated from the command module with Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong inside. Armstrong was the first to come out. Armstrong has claimed to have said while stepping out and taking his first steps on the moon,
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Before leaving the moon and heading back, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong placed an American flag in the fine dust of the moon. On July 24th, the astronauts returned home. It was recorded that no spaceflight after would return with such little fuel. The astronauts were then quarantined after being rescued in the Pacific, and days later returned to the public, heroes, thus putting the Americans first in the space race.